Well, good afternoon, everyone here in the room and everyone online and anyone watching later on. Eye contact with all different groups. The title I've got my name is Mario Baldassari. I teach at St. Francis in the Department of Psychological Science. I have, over the last probably year or more, been on a little bit of a journey where I've been trying to figure out what I think about, in particular, things like ChatGPT. And of course, I've been thinking about how teaching in college settings differs after all the COVID-19 shutdowns and how those affected both our practice and the way students approach college and the way they think about a lot of different parts of their academics. And I think that's uniquely combined with ChatGPT in this moment and all the other large language models in a way that leads me to think about a slightly different approach to academic dishonesty, more than slightly different approach than I've used in the past. So I'm going to share some of the findings, some of the ideas, some of the techniques that I've found and come up with over the last, I think year or so. From a variety of different sources. I'll cite a couple of them as I see them, as we come across them. I think based on the kind of variety of interaction types we have going on here, we won't have a lot of interactive discussion type moments. We'll try a couple of them and see how they go. But for the most part, I think this will end up as me talking, which I suppose is partially what we all signed up for. So here we go. First off, the main inspiration for a lot of this comes from a presentation given by Dr. Kevin Gannon, who's a historian who runs the Teaching and Learning Center equivalent at Gannon University, and who gave a keynote speech at the Society for Teaching Psychology last spring that I found really, really illuminating. So a lot of what he says said then is things I will be repeating here. I would love to just share his thing with you all, but I'm not supposed to because it's STP's own thing, and I'm sure that he gives great keynotes that you can get him to come to your campus for. So I'll do my best to give a little bit of the same details he shares. There's a little additional context for this too, which is that we had a college meeting way back in January 2024, where a couple of us shared some of our tactics for good, hopefully, use of Canvas. And one of the things I showed prompted a colleague to ask, "Don't you worry about cheating in this assignment?" And in the moment, I gave kind of a rambling answer because my best answer is, I think, complicated and has a couple of sections to it. And so I'll partially also be giving that question a better answer today by talking in more detail about how I think about cheating and how I've changed my thinking about cheating over the years as well. There's also some spare thoughts in here from a faculty forum conversation back in October 2024, thinking about how one of our goals through a career in teaching is to be reflective throughout, to consider what kinds of changes happen around us and how we might change our teaching tactics or skills or any of those things. And the fact that, that's what we do. That's how we continue to teach and teach well, is we're pretty much always adapting. And so thinking about how these approaches I'll talk about today and other student-centered approaches are the things that benefit those at-risk students the most, the folks who we might otherwise lose, who might drop out of school for one reason or another. So there is, as always, good evidentiary backing for these things. But I want to start with a discussion. So if you're, in the room or online, I've got a Mentimeter that I invite you to take part in. It asks you a couple of questions. I think they're open-ended. I'm hoping to collect some interesting word clouds here, so please do this. It asks, the questions like, do you worry about students cheating? Do you think they do it? How do you think they do it? And then what do you do about it? So you could use the QR code on the screen, or you could type in that link, menti.com/ all that salad there if you're a great typist. I didn't set myself up to show the results, so what I'll do is it'll be fine, I think, because there aren't a ton of folks attending it live today. I'll just tell you what the results are as they come in on the machine I have over here. So the first question is, do you think students cheat? And let's see. Am I doing this right? Are you able to see it? There we go. So I've got 9 yeses and 1 no, and no people saying they're not sure. So I would love to talk to the person who said no. I think that's a really interesting response here. I would assume that most of us think students cheat. And so somebody who doesn't is an interesting person to talk to. The next question should pop up for you, I think. Is it working for you, Natalie?
Yes, it is.
Okay, the second question is, are you worried students cheat without you knowing about it? Really simply again, yes, no, I'm not sure. What do you think? In other words, do you catch them? 9 of you said yes, they cheat. Do you think you catch them when they do? Looks like 1 or 2 people still. Okay, I think that's everybody almost. I've got 4 yeses, 3 nos, and 2 who aren't sure. That split, I think, represents us pretty well. Some of us are very worried that students have, I think, creative ways to get around the things we design, and so we're worried that they are, so to speak, getting away with things. Others are confident that we can notice the difference, and I'll say that I fall usually into the no camp and sometimes in the not sure camp here myself, where if a student turns in a piece of writing that is dramatically different from their usual writing, you can usually tell. Or if 2 students turn in the same thing, as you're grading them all, you go, hey, this is really familiar, right? That experience happens to us all, and I think it's reasonable to say that students maybe don't cheat very often without us knowing about it. Definitely in the camp of the not sure folks as well. There's got to be times it gets past me, and I'll talk in a minute about that. And here I have an open-ended one. How do you think they cheat? So back to your Mentimeter. How do you think they do it? What do they do? Just type me a short phrase, maybe what you think is most common. Okay, we've got some folks talking about AI and ChatGPT, online assistance, finding ways around honor lock. Sharing information with each other is also popping up on here, collaborating with each other on individual assignments. And taking answers from friends or other classmates. So those are kind of the 2 big ones that I see coming up here. We're worried about things they get from the internet, so be those ChatGPT or some other source, and then also, or just, I guess, Googling things as they try to answer them, even though they're supposed to be on an honor-locked browser. And then collaboration with classmates in ways that they shouldn't be doing. One person mentions on here inappropriate citation or paraphrasing. That's definitely an issue we encounter in my department as well. We'll talk more about all that stuff soon. Is this my last question? I think I had 4. This one is, what do you do about cheating? So if you find somebody, if you think you catch somebody, so to speak, what do? It probably differs based on the situation. Ooh, this one is word clouding for me. One is educate, one says confront, and another says consequence. It's probably one person's answer. Unable to prove sometimes, have a discussion, submit an academic integrity violation, address it with the students, give it a 0. Yeah, that I think captures the range really nicely. Sometimes you're in a situation where you can just talk to the student about it and say, I've noticed this thing, I'm curious what happened, or I'm curious what's going on here. It can feel nice to approach it from that place where you're not immediately accusing them of something. If someone repeats violations, then you start to go, all right, maybe I need to go a little stronger with my reaction here. Maybe I need to do some kind of confronting. Maybe I need to give a 0. Maybe I need to talk to the class as a whole, have those kinds of conversations. And then I know that other folks don't really think about those things and just skip straight to academic integrity violations, which is an option too. That's why it's there. A couple other things have come in while I've been talking. Review their previous work. That's a good point too. You might compare what they've turned in to something they've turned in before. I rarely do that, I'll say, because if I suspect someone's using ChatGPT on an assignment, for example, they probably used it before, but they must have fooled me. So my approach at that point is, well, I guess you got me on that one, so I'll go ahead and leave that one alone, and we'll just move forward from here. And sometimes I'll talk to them about it, right? I'll say, have you been using it all semester? And if they say yes, then we have to talk from there. So there's a whole bunch of, let's see if I have a final question here. Oh, I've also asked why they cheat. That's a good question. I'm glad I asked that. Another Mentimeter. Sorry, I've been talking like it's over, but I'm also curious why as a group we think students cheat. Why do they do it? While everyone's answering, to fill the dead space here a little bit, I noticed one other submission on the last one, which was mastery, not perfection, which is also a nice way to think about this. Students will learn their way to achieving good academic honesty over time. And some of what I'm seeing here and why students cheat reflects that. Sometimes they just don't know, right? Sometimes students turn in things that violate the academic honesty policy because they didn't know they were doing something bad. There's definitely cases where students don't realize that ChatGPT is a bad thing, for one thing, because across different courses, we all have very different requirements about using it. There are courses in departments on our campus and all across the country that use it intentionally and actually promote the usage of these large language models in classrooms. So sometimes they might not realize that it's not allowed, so to speak, in yours. But the other things that come up here are all the things I think about too. Sometimes students are afraid, sometimes they run out of time, sometimes they feel like they're being given busy work that they just have to complete. What else is on here? They've procrastinated. There's a couple interesting ones here that talk about laziness, so we'll talk about that. A desire to get something done quickly, that students are not engaged. Those are all interesting things that I hope that definitely sound like me, a past version of me. And so I want to try to give and talk about the tools and the different approaches that can help us believe in our students and trust them and get away from the kind of adversarial position that we can find ourselves in sometimes when you present, you give students an assignment and you worry about all the ways they could try to get around it or cheat it or ruin it. Okay, that is the true end of the Mentimeter. Thank you for participating. So the next thing I want to talk about is based on some of the research, but also some discussions among teachers and some of the other resources I've been looking at in the meantime. And of course, just to try to capture every single possibility, why they do it. So here, one reason students do it, we already brought up time crunch. They run out of time. Another thing to think about there is they're taking a bunch of classes. So they have time crunches in all of those classes. And we sometimes, more often than not, I would say, happen to line up all our due dates in a row, right? Especially come midterm time, something's due in every single one of their classes. So their time is absolutely crunched. And maybe this is a student who also works 20 or 40 hours a week at a job. And maybe this is a student who has care responsibilities at home. So their time is already crunched. I know that part of the point of college is to give students that experience of understanding what happens in a time crunch, learning how to manage your time appropriately and effectively, but we're not always clear about that with them. And so sometimes they end up in a time crunch, they haven't been able to plan ahead for it, and they just have to do something to get the stuff done. And so that's where sometimes copying or ChatGPT or those kinds of solutions start to look sensible. Other times, maybe they're not sure how to do your assignment correctly. Maybe we give them some kind of assignment that has a really complicated structure to it. Maybe it has a bunch of different sections that have varying levels of explanation. I'm definitely guilty of that one. It just happened in one of my classes last week. What we've done in that case is we've provided them with this unfortunate situation of logistical hurdles. We've told them that we want them to do something to show us the knowledge they have, but they aren't sure exactly how to show it to us. We've made things so complicated that they don't quite understand how to do the assignment. And so that can lead to, for one thing, procrastination, which can lead to the time crunch problem, but also can just leave them feeling unsure how to do something. And so then, talk to somebody who figured it out, copy their work down, you're done, you can move on with your life. It's also possible, though, that the student just plain can't figure out what you want them to show, what knowledge they're supposed to have. We'd call that a cognitive hurdle. This is a situation where they know what the assignment is, but they still don't know how to do it. They understand what you want them to do, but they don't have the information to do it. Maybe because we haven't talked about it enough in class, maybe because they missed a reading assignment, anything in between those two things as well. This kind of cognitive hurdle is also the kind of thing that would lead a student to make a decision to either copy or go to some other source to just get something done. Maybe they're not interested. That's also possible. Someone one of the Mentimeters was something like this, right? Like low engagement or that sort of thing. Maybe they're not interested in the course. Maybe they think it's busy work. Maybe they're not interested in the assignment. Maybe you're teaching a GE requirement and the student isn't fully bought into that course. Its purpose is unclear, maybe. The purpose of the assignment is unclear. That's possible too. One last one I'll offer here is, do they do it to get you? Are students cheating to try to, show you who's boss or something? I think people think this sometimes, and it's okay. It's reasonable to feel, it's not uncommon, I should say, to feel that relationship. Sometimes we feel like we are going to class, we're nervous about the conversation we're going to have, we're nervous about the things we're going to say, and if someone's going to call us out and tell us we're wrong, we all have those moments of imposter syndrome. We all have moments where we feel slightly underprepared, and those moments and lots of other things can lead to that unfortunate adversarial relationship feeling with students that could lead us to conclude, yeah, they're trying to get me. They want me to, they just want to get through my class. They're trying to, they're getting at my credibility. All of these have solutions. All of these, why do they do it? Why do they cheat? In so many words. And we'll go through a couple of them in a row here. First, I want to talk about logistical and cognitive hurdles. So one of the things that gets picked up here when we talk about the way courses are designed is the word rigor. And the word rigor is, if nothing else, very ill-defined in the educational literature, particularly in the higher education literature. I picked out some quotes from a paper by Draeger and colleagues. So that's the citation on the bottom here. It's a study from the journal Innovative Higher Education, where they tried to figure out what students thought it meant when a course or program was called rigorous. So these are some of the things they found, including a bit from Wise and Soneral in 2018. Stressors like fast pacing, high workload, unclear relevance to life or careers, and low faculty support are the things that students think make a course rigorous. And so I think we can pretty immediately see, number one, all of those showed up in the reasons students cheat. And number two, those are all logistical hurdles, right? None of those are cognitive hurdles. None of those students can't understand the material. The students are in a situation where the logistics of the course and the instructions and the assignment load they have keeps them from keeping up. Findings from the Draeger paper are things like workload, level of complexity, amount of time demanded by course materials, and the level of thought required are the things that reflect rigor. So some of those are logistic, some of those are cognitive. The thing that I personally am trying to seek more and more is that the places students struggle, the places students have to battle to figure things out in my courses are cognitive hurdles rather than logistic, right? I want them to know what they're supposed to do. I don't want them to have to work for an hour to figure out what the assignment even is. I want them to work for an hour to figure out how to get the information they need and how to put it into the assignment. So their conclusion in the Draeger paper is, it's clear that students associated workload with academic rigor and further associated workload with the need to balance various aspects of their lives. So a rigorous course is a course with a bunch of stuff in it. It's kind of the big takeaway there. And when a course has a bunch of stuff in it, it's going to start conflicting with the rest of my life. And so when you're particularly at an institution that has a lot of first-generation college students, a lot of college students living at home, they're going to have other responsibilities, right? They're going to have jobs they have to go to. They're going to have responsibilities at home that they have to attend to. So we don't want to be in that push and pull. I don't want to be part of their workload in that way. I don't want to just give them more stuff to do. That's how they get into that sort of box checking feeling. I want to give them cognitive challenges. I want to try to show them new things and have them use new information in new ways that they might not have thought of. So trying to get ourselves away from those logistic hurdles and into the cognitive ones is one of the first things we can, I think, meaningfully do in our assignment design that can discourage the activities we typically call cheating. So here's a way to kind of think about whether your courses are challenging cognitively or logistically. This is a table from the Draeger et al. Paper. It gives a list of things that are logistical hurdles and cognitive hurdles. So on this particular table, the top 5 are logistical and the bottom 5 are cognitive hurdles. So just to read a couple of them out, the number of 20-page papers I'm assigned shows that a course is 75% said rigorous. That's what rigor is to students. And again, that's a logistical hurdle. It's a big giant paper you're making them read. We are making them read. Finding out from a majority of students they had to work hard to meet instructor standards shows the course is rigorous. That can potentially be a little bit of both, maybe logistical and cognitive, I guess. I said the top 5 were logistical. They're supposed to be mainly so. The amount of reading I'm assigned shows the course is rigorous. The number of hours a week I spend preparing shows the course is rigorous. But I think we all know from our experiences in the classroom that students can learn a lot in less time if we can change the way we design things, if we can scaffold assignments, if we can ask for more cognitively from them, then we don't need so much logistically from them. So that's what we get to in these bottom few. Students rated a course as, they were less likely to use the word rigorous in statements in these bottom 5. So things like, if a course instructor expects students to apply theories or concepts to practical problems or new situations, definite cognitive hurdle. They didn't rate that as rigorous. Only 28% said that was rigor. Down at the bottom, if the course instructor expects students to analyze the basic elements of an idea, experience, or theory, then a course is rigorous. Only 11% agreed with that. And I think we would all disagree with that, right? We think that those are the things that make our courses rigorous and important and interesting. We want students to get into those challenging ideas and look for interesting, difficult solutions. So the balance I try to look for, because you can't completely eliminate logistical hurdles, is to have a course have more cognitive challenges, or at least to have the cognitive challenges not eclipsed by the logistical challenges. We have processes and skills and structures we have to teach them too. But if we design a course that has a lot of logistical challenges, students will think it's hard. Makes good sense, and they'll find it very challenging. And that's kind of socially, culturally, what we seem to think rigor is. But when the logistical challenges are too heavy, it sets the students up to fail, sets them up to fall behind, which is what leads them to do the things that we call cheating are. So I think part of this is how we were taught. It depends on the discipline you're in, of course, and it depends on the generation you're in as well. But definitely for the majority for good chunks of my learning career, especially in college, that's how I was taught too. Things were given to me. The lectures were presented. There wasn't a lot of cognitive challenges. There was a lot of logistical challenges, and I luckily was able to succeed through that. But that doesn't mean it's the way I have to teach. And so if we can all sort of move beyond that, if we were taught that way, we can stop sort of pulling the ladder up behind ourselves and instead drop a ladder to bring people into the academy as opposed to continuing to push people out. That's what happens when your course is full of logistical hurdles. First generation students most at risk, are more likely to fail it than other students, and so those students get pushed out of college entirely. So according to Kevin Gannon, he used a word that I'm going to reuse and attribute to him so that no one thinks I'm going too extreme here. He calls it academic hazing, the act of making them produce a bunch of stuff, read a bunch of complicated papers. I had to do this, so you had to do it, is an act of hazing that we can just get rid of. We don't have to think about our teaching that way. We, in fact, can move on from it and start to design more welcoming assignments, assignments that make more sense for what the students are going to do after they graduate, and assignments that are less laden with logistical hurdles, because that kind of course design and that kind of failure for students is a signal from us, whether intentional or not, that some of them don't deserve to be here. And that's not the case. We've welcomed them here, we've brought them here, we've admitted them to the university, they're in our classes, they belong here. That's our marketing strategy, right? We say you belong here. So to push students out through course design is something that I realized I have done in the past, and that I have, I think, hopefully gotten my way all the way out of at this point. According to Gannon, rigor does harm. It's tied up in our identities sometimes as teachers. We think that this is the way it was done, and maybe we need to pause, engage in that reflective practice I talked about at the beginning, and then re-examine ourselves and our patterns. All that said, it's still kind of hard out there right now. Just a couple of, back when, this is back when I used Twitter, before it was changed and all those things. So a conversation from 2024 about the current moment we find ourselves in, even sort of keeping in mind the things I've said so far. We have to recognize too that there are great teachers doing authentic assignments, and those folks are still struggling, especially through the beginning of the large language model popularity out in the rest of the world. Using summary as an assessment of somebody's knowledge, using like their ability to summarize a piece of writing in their own words, is the thing we've used for a long time. He says millennia, this particular professor. I don't know if it goes back that far, but the idea that you can read something and then tell me what's in it is big for us. That's one of the main things. I assign things like that constantly, every single class, basically, with the students have a reading, try to get them reading it beforehand and ask them to post a little summary or answer a couple of summary type questions before we get there. And teaching, especially online in the age of ChatGPT, is pretty disheartening in this way. When you think you've AI-proofed the discussions, when you think you've AI-proofed your assignments, and then you still get students trying to turn them in that way anyway, it can be really disheartening for sure. And so I also want to acknowledge that. Like this particular teacher says she even went toward process instead of product. She tried to talk about ChatGPT in all the right ways. But even then, and especially in an online course, right, where there's not as much connection between you and the students, where establishing that connection is really difficult, it seems like there's a little bit more of that going around. This conversation goes on. One way to solve this is to go back to proctoring, right? You could proctor all your tests. You could go back to oral exams. But we have to figure it out one way or another. And if that's the way, this particular person isn't saying that that's the way you could go. I'm going to offer that is a way you could go. Nonetheless, people are struggling. Teachers are struggling, trying to figure out how to measure knowledge, how to measure whether someone has read a thing you want them to have read without asking them for a written summary, because again, that's one of the things ChatGPT can do decently well, is summarize a particular piece. Or even, well, we'll get into this in a second, other large language models do it even better than ChatGPT, is what I stopped myself from saying. But it leaves you to these upsetting views, like, I don't know if they even want to learn. This is a game of school. Check the boxes. Get out of here. I'm trying to go get a job. I just need a BA for it. Well, we're not trying to do that, right? That's not the goal of this institution in particular. It's not the goal of higher education in general, especially liberal arts higher education. But people are saying this even in middle school, is the last tweet on here. I'm teaching public school virtually, and I'm with you. I think about this daily. I try to figure out how we can differentiate learning from checking boxes. And I promise this is the last tweet I'll show you. This is a tweet from Jesse Stommel, who is another thinker on teaching and pedagogy that I really respect. He says, what's getting in our way when it comes to teaching? That's the most vital question. What is stopping us from getting the things we want? If your students are struggling, let's not worry about what they are, what's different about them, what COVID-19 did to their approach to school, or what they want out of school. Let's ask what barricades the system has erected in front of them instead. Let's not worry about them. Let's try to break down some of those barricades to let them in no matter what situation they're in. Don't need to blame the students. You don't necessarily even need to blame yourself. Think about the structures around you. Think about the way higher education is set up and has traditionally been set up, and set aside 45 minutes and ask, all right, is the structure here things that puts each other at risk? Is the structure of this course, of this assignment, something that puts somebody at risk? He's sort of offering this in a much more general sense, but in the context we're talking about today, think about it. Is the structure of a course, is the structure of an assignment putting students at risk to fall behind and then lose track and then resort to things like cheating? And if so, what can we do about it? Another important factor in all this is that we all said, we were all sort of split apart on whether we thought we could tell when students are cheating. And there are problems as soon as we start to try to detect cheating. For one really important thing, it's after the fact. It already happened. They already cheated. Wouldn't you rather prevent them from cheating in the first place? That would be great, right? Either through creative or new assignment design that prevents it from happening, or maybe through honor lock. I'll talk in a second why I don't particularly like honor lock. Maybe you have a conversation with them earlier on in the semester in a way that leads them to not think about it, in a way that leads them to not need to cheat. How about you can structure things in a way that you're paying attention to the whys that we already discussed of why they cheat to prevent them from getting to that spot in the first place. Because detecting cheating after the fact also ignores the why. It's also punitive. It makes you a cop, and I don't know about you, but I'm a teacher. I'm not a cop. I don't want to do that job. I respect the people who do, but that's not why I do this. I don't want to look after people. I don't want to try to get them. I don't want to try to discover them. I don't like looking for it. It makes me feel gross. It's a yucky feeling. It's not why I do this. And in addition to that, this punitive action, the act of policing students, does not help them learn. So I'm citing here a particular paper from Translational Issues in Psychological Science that makes the point that there are empirically based reasons to not administer time-limited tests at all. But this is just one example of how policing students, putting harsh limits on things, putting time limits, adding logistical hurdles does not help students learn. There's an open book I have linked to on this slide that talks about untimed exams and how those things lead us to better outcomes from the Oregon State Center for Teaching and Learning. Another reason to not engage in policing is that the apps and the companies that run those policing things take your data. Here I've kind of incendiarily called them vultures. In most free apps, right, we all know this from the onset of Facebook, in a free app, you're paying with your data. You're paying with your information. So if you're using a free app, if you're putting things into ChatGPT, or if you're putting things into a ChatGPT detector that's free, or if you're using any other kind of ed tech that's free, they're using your data. They keep your data when you're done using it. And so if you upload an assignment to it, they have that assignment now. And that's also free of things like Turnitin. Turnitin keeps all the stuff. It's got everything. That's why its business model is slightly changing lately. That's why it's folks have complaints about it not doing its job as well anymore because it is pivoting somewhat and it sells off all the data it has to other companies. So in addition to the fact that you pay with your data, we don't really fully understand the terms and conditions of these apps, these companies, and the subscriptions sometimes make data yours again. Like if you pay for ChatGPT, you kind of own your data, but not necessarily. And a bunch of citations here for sources for all these different thoughts and some ideas for how you might consider over time trying to resist ed tech for reasons such as there is a lot of value in these data. Turnitin sold for almost $2 billion in 2019. And they didn't sell because they were great at their jobs. They sold because they had a lot of data to sell. So I'll just give you like one last, I'm a little bit on a soapbox here. I'll give you one last thought on this before I move on, which is that the idea that every problem we encounter in higher ed has a solution that you can buy and an app that'll solve it is an impulse I think we should resist. We don't need an app to solve every single thing. There are other ways to solve the problems we have, from cheating to any other you can list in the academy. Okay, I build this as talking about ChatGPT, and I haven't really yet. I keep mentioning it, but here let's actually deal with where this kind of AI text prediction fits in. So one argument in favor of these new large language models and their apps is that this is a new tool. Maybe it's a new tool that we really ought to get used to. People have braced themselves or felt upset about new tools in the past, going back to the calculator, right? When the calculator was invented, math professors worried that it would keep students from learning how to do basic math. When Grammarly came out, we were worried it would stop students from learning how to write good grammatical sentences. I had a past job where I had to teach students how to do hand calculations for null hypothesis significance tests, so statistical tests. So they had to find all the means and the standard deviations, and then they had to perform the t-test by hand. because the belief was that's how they learn it. They have to actually do it by hand, and letting them complete it through a piece of software is going to hurt their learning. So I say all this to say, maybe we're freaking out about nothing. Maybe we're nervous that the ChatGPT will stop students from learning how to write, but in fact, it'll turn out just fine. Things will change, we will all adapt, and we will move forward like we did when the calculator was invented, for example. Or like when SPSS came out and the American Statistical Association said, you don't need to teach hand calculation anymore. Only love for my former employers. They're a very excellent department of folks. However, having said this sort of opening salvo of maybe it's okay, as Professor Inger Mewburn says, Inger Mewburn is a historian and runs a teaching and learning center in Australia, and has a very popular blog on writing in academia. I think I misspoke. She doesn't run a teaching and learning center. I can't think of her university right off. I think it's in Canberra, Australia. Anyway, her point is that as Gen AI tools become mainstream, people's basic writing skills might atrophy. And there is some data that showed that basic math skills atrophied somewhat after the invention of the calculator. And so we don't do mental arithmetic as well as we did decades ago before the calculator existed. So maybe some of that is true. Maybe those worries are reasonably based. There also is a massive ecosystem of apps. So we all talk about ChatGPT because it's the free one, it's the famous one, but there are hundreds of them at this point, maybe even thousands. I learned this at the Fort Wayne Teaching and Learning Conference last year from, I can't think of his last name. Dr. Jose Bowen's keynote talk at the Fort Wayne Teaching and Learning Conference. Yeah, there's so many of these apps, and a lot of them cost money, which means that there's some students who wouldn't have access to them, which adds a whole nother wrinkle to all this, right? That means that the students who can afford them, who can afford the nice versions of these apps, can produce work through them that looks better and more real to us. So there's also another way that inequality rears its head in this conversation, because the students who can only afford to use the free ones are using the free bad versions of these tools, and so they are more likely to get caught cheating, quote unquote, even though their colleagues might be doing just the same, but because they can afford subscriptions, they get better versions of it. But I say that to say also that there are apps that specifically can do academic stuff. You can put a PDF of an academic paper into a certain app, I can't remember the name of it, but it'll produce you a really nice summary of that. It's a lot better than just asking ChatGPT for an answer or even feeding ChatGPT a document, which usually costs you money anyway. So it might be impossible to thwart them. It might be impossible to detect them too. The detection software is pretty easily fooled, especially for somebody who has a paid subscription. So that's also, again, another equity issue that comes into play when we start to talk about AI text production.
The detection strategy being full, how about, it's not supposed to pick out areas that you are looking for that this person is cheating? The detection software that you talked about your last.
Yeah.
When you say detection tool is full, the detection tool is supposed to bring out areas that you feel that the student might have cheated or copied from someone. Yeah.
Right.
So how is it full into?
Well, so the way, without getting too deep into the nitty-gritty of how these things work in the basic way, so the way ChatGPT works, right, on its core level, is that it is investigating correlations between words. So what that means is when a word appears in a piece of text, I should back up one step actually. The way ChatGPT was taught to do what it does was it was fed all this data from the internet, right? It was given lots and lots of writing from all over the free parts of the internet. And so what it did with those pieces of writing was notice what words tend to follow other words. Okay, so if the word "and" appears in a piece of writing, it knows the likelihood with which any word might appear before or after it. And then it knows the likelihood of any word that might appear after the word that appears after it based on the words that have come before. So it's a really complicated set of relationships that it understands. But what that basically means is if you ask it the same question, it will generate almost the same answer across instances. right? So if you ask it one thing today and that same thing tomorrow, it should give you a pretty similar answer. There will be small differences in it for sure, because there's a little bit of error probability built into the model of the way it's built. But in general, the thing it does is produce the most likely response to the question you've asked it. And so what the detectors do is they look for really high correlation between words. So that's sort of the basic idea, is that if an AI text production app produced these words, they will be really highly correlated with one another. They will be very likely to appear one after the other. So what those detectors do is they look for that kind of relationship, and if those relationships are really high, then they say this is probably generated by one of the large language models. So there's a possibility that a student could write something that happens to fit there. That's probably going to be rare, that it'll be, you won't put it into a detector and it'll come up as 100% likely ChatGPT made this, but actually the student wrote it. That's probably rare. But for all the numbers between 0 and 100%, there's a lot of variability and possibilities that it can make mistakes, especially if it's a free version. If you're like, the one I always end up on is the first one I found when I Googled this the first time, which is, it's like gpt0.me or something, and I have no idea how reputable it is. Don't go there and get a virus on my account, but that's I don't know how reliable it is. The way I use it is, if I read a sentence and I go, that sounds like ChatGPT, I put it in there, and if it's 100%, my policy is I'll email the student and go, hi, how'd you make this? and see where we go from there. So it's an imperfect world. It's really interesting. It's mathematically complicated in a way that I can just barely explain. So I hope I did it reasonable justice there. Thanks for the question, Godwin. There are a couple other important things to think about in the context of all these apps around the ChatGPT universe. The first is that it's going to keep changing and they will keep getting better. And so our ability to detect them over time is going to drop down pretty dramatically. The way Dr. Bowen said it there's his name. The way Dr. Bowen said it last year at the Fort Wayne Teaching and Learning Conference was, we are in the Ask Jeeves phase of development of these apps. So if you remember the Ask Jeeves phase of the building of internet search engines, that's about where we are right now. If you remember the Alta Vista phase, also props to you, you're like me. I eschewed Ask Jeeves in favor of Alta Vista, and Google was this other one that we weren't really worried about yet. Oh, those days. So a couple things to think about. Maybe you want to kind of get used to it, see what these things do. Maybe you don't have any experience yet. One idea is to consider adding Bing AI to your browser. If you're using the Microsoft Edge browser, you can click a button and have it add its AI client to your browser, just so you can get an exposure to it. You're also getting exposure every time you Google stuff now, right? It's giving you answers at the top that are AI generated, which are usually wrong in my experience so far, but it's a way to expose yourself to it. And not to sort of chug the Kool-Aid here, but it is out there, like I've been saying. It's prevalent in the business world. It's probably not going anywhere. Like, they might all go behind a paywall one day, or they might all sort of collapse into a mess of misunderstandings. I can't positively say, but I don't think they'll go anywhere. So what that means is your students will probably need to know how to use it, and they might need to know how to use it really well, depending on what field they're going into. So the way Dr. Bowen advised thinking about the fact that students will need to use it is, maybe you can design some assignments where they use it. Maybe you can teach them how to use it well for your field. And another thought is, the work that AI can do, the writing it can produce, is worth about a C grade. So you can actually, through this, expect more of students. Sort of think of it like the invention of the calculator. You can do more complex math now because you don't have to do all this addition, subtraction, and multiplication in your head. You can do it perfectly accurately on the calculator. So you can get ChatGPT to produce a bad version of a piece of writing, and then you can fix it up as a student. So an additional why for cheating at this point might be that it's really easy now. It's really easy to get these decent-ish looking pieces of text that sometimes students don't recognize the difference between the ChatGPT generated piece of writing and a human generated piece. And so to them, they're like, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. So it feels easy and it feels like you've completed the assignment. So maybe start asking them to do harder things. But then also maybe talk about privacy, talk about ethics, talk about the processes. I'll give you some ideas and tools for that in just a second here too. Before we get there, though, I want to keep in this idea of how do we teach students to use it. So just a couple of thoughts on what kinds of knowledge and skills are important for using ChatGPT pretty well. So this is a piece of writing from Dr. Bowen himself. I mentioned that I've collected this from a bunch of different places. His keynote is also an important contributor to the talk I'm giving right now. I'm just going to share a couple of excerpts from this piece of writing that he did for Times Higher Education last April. It's an extract from his book, which I don't have, but he recommended, and I'm guessing based on how well he spoke about these things last year is probably pretty excellent. The book is called Teaching with AI, A Practical Guide to a New Era of Human Learning. They talk about the reliability of detection tools in the book and then how to combat cheating without using those detection tools. And the reason it's titled, Is It Time to Turn Off, Turn It In, is because Turnitin has added AI detection to their software, and some universities aren't using it. They have found it to be unreliable enough that they have shut that option off. The example I have in my slides here is Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt tried Turnitin's AI, and then they decided they didn't want it because it was producing too high a number of false positive accusations for students. So some of the stuff Dr. Bowen recommends thinking about is that the AI detectors are not high quality. They vary considerably in their accuracy and their rate of false positives, which are the important thing here, right? If you have a false negative, that means a student used a ChatGPT type tool and you failed to identify it. Oh darn, you missed it. Well, they used it pretty well, apparently, because you didn't notice it and your detector didn't notice it. So maybe there's something valuable going on there, a whole conversation we could have. But on the other hand, if it's producing a bunch of false positives, then it's accusing a bunch of students of cheating when they didn't. And that, I would argue, is the very last thing I want to do. That's part of the reason I'm so cautious when I think a student may have used ChatGPT or cheated in some other way. And so I personally would not want to be in any situation where I'm at the risk of false positive accusations. University of Pennsylvania's disciplinary report found a 7-fold increase in unfair advantages when people use ChatGPT or a tool offered through Chegg. But students say that the AI helps them in those situations. It says that the AI helps them better understand the material. It's hard to say. I can't even comment on all the things in these paragraphs because it's all so interesting and so complicated and so varied. But what's popping out to me in this moment is that all of your students are on TikTok, right? And on TikTok, a big advertiser is Grammarly. They are smart. They know what they're doing. They are looking to grab students, particularly high school and college students, the ones on TikTok. So these kinds of tools are advertised directly to students these days, and so they're definitely not going anywhere, particularly things like Grammarly and other education and higher ed focused versions of these AI tools. Grammarly being one that I also have pretty decent opinions on. I feel like Grammarly does you're definitely giving them your data, but you also are, students are getting corrections to grammar that seem to really help them, that seem to really enable them to communicate their thoughts in a clearer way, which is supposed to be the goal of all we're doing here. So at the bottom here, he says, the motive is clear. 12% of ChatGPT users say it increased their GPA. And so the students are using it with intention. It's helping them do better in school. So the question I think we can ask is, how can we help them close that gap themselves? And also, is it a bad thing necessarily that using these kinds of apps helps them close those gaps? So I'll run through some ideas fairly speedily here because we're running a little bit short on time. We're almost finished here, but I want to give you some ideas for things you could do. So here's, I watched a presentation from Stony Brook's Teaching and Learning Services folks. They're called the CELT. They talked about ways to address or not address AI through assessment redesign, and here are their 6 ideas. You could ignore it. You could just accept the writing as it is, which honestly I do sometimes because the writing the students produce through ChatGPT doesn't get very good grades. So sometimes an assignment you already have will lead to such bad ChatGPT responses that you might be able to just ignore it. You might try to ban or restrict it. Maybe you put honor lock on your browser. to ban or restrict some other type of cheating. This same kind of idea here. Maybe you invigilate, maybe you put all your students in a room and have them take the test right in front of you in person in the moment. Maybe you design around those kinds of tools. Maybe you find a way to design an assignment that ChatGPT can't do. One I usually give to folks is, if you ask students to cite sources, ChatGPT is going to fall apart pretty quickly. They might be able to get it to produce the writing, but then they're going to have to still go find the sources and insert those citations, because ChatGPT hallucinates sources. It makes them up. It comes up with sources that do not exist. And so a student will only make that mistake once before they get the feedback in your comments where you say, hey, this source doesn't exist. They realize, oh, it led me the wrong way. So that's one way. On the other hand, the expensive versions of these tools can cite stuff. So I don't know how deeply enmeshed all of them are in the student culture. Some students might know about those more expensive tools and might be able to afford them. And so designing around those folks might be more difficult. Maybe you embrace it. So maybe you adopt our illustrious colleague David Stellick's approach, and you think about how you can include ChatGPT and AI in your assignments and teach students to use it well. Or maybe you just need to back up and rethink. Maybe we can think about, rather than designing around things, maybe rather than embracing them, there's some other way to approach our teaching and learning processes that can reduce the frequency with which students feel like they need those tools. So that goes all the way back to the beginning of this when I was talking about why students cheat. If you can back up and reduce the reasons they cheat, if you can stop those from happening, you're also going to stop them from resorting to using things like ChatGPT. We don't have time to do the work here, which is fine because of the attendance we have in person. So if you're watching this later or if you're using it now, here's an activity to take forward. So first off, think about why students cheat in your class, if you think they do. And we know most of us do, 9 of 10 of us in this room, in this virtual room. Think about why they do it. Maybe talk with someone who teaches in your program or someone who teaches another section of that same course you're worried about, if possible, and then try to generate some ideas. What can you do to prevent the issues you're facing, the cheating that you're facing, as opposed to detect and identify and punish? What can you do to stop it from happening in the first place? Can you have the students literally do less work? I know that sounds crazy to say. Maybe they're just doing too much work. Maybe we're assigning them too many things. Maybe we are setting up too many logistical hurdles. What you would do then is give them fewer assignments, but expect more in each assignment. You can make a class simpler, you can make an assignment simpler without making it easier. I'm not saying make your course easy, I'm saying make your course simpler, make it more possible to do. Don't make the assignments so easy a 5th grader could do them. Make them so simple a 5th grader could understand what they might be asking for. That might be one way. But make them complicated, make them difficult to figure out. Give the students the cognitive hurdles that we all think we are giving them. Maybe you've got some assignment idea that can't be plagiarized. Maybe you've got an idea for something that you could really ratchet up the standards to really high standards that ChatGPT could never get to. A couple more ideas let's see. Oh, what is this? I already skipped past, there we go, sorry, I think I did 2 at once. This comes from Drs. Lori Slifka and Lori Daniels of the Kaiser Graduate University, another talk from the Society for Teaching Psych in 2024. Make assignments personal, make them reflective or specific or local. ChatGPT can't tell the student about themselves, right? The student can only write about themselves. Add in a piece where they have to personally reflect. Add in some kind of specific scenario or fact or topic covered in class. My colleague had an experience recently where she asked students to refer to and explain a particular theory of development, and some of the students' work made up a fake theory. And so it's pretty clear that ChatGPT was involved in those. So asking them those kinds of specifics. Keep in mind that ChatGPT only has access to the free parts of the internet. So anything behind a paywall, meaning any academic publication, isn't accessible to it. Anything new, it takes a long time for it to categorize new stuff and integrate new stuff into its system. So things that are from the last couple of years are also not in ChatGPT yet. So if your field has seen a major update, ChatGPT doesn't know about that yet. Change your focus, change your grading. especially on written assignments, to favor process rather than the final product. Scaffold the process for the students. Give them due dates through the semester where you give them feedback. They work slowly on an assignment rather than trying to pull together an entire paper in one night or 1 week at the end of the semester. Guilty. The feeling I remember most from that is it's like 5 or 6 a.m. the next day, bless you. You're done, the paper's done, it's gonna get turned in. You got to slide it under the professor's door because it's so close to late. But it's like 6 a.m. and you go, do I eat or go to bed now? What am I going to do with myself today? This feels really weird. Keep your students from having that experience. Don't let them be like me. So break those big assignments into smaller pieces and assign writing prompts that require information later than ChatGPT's latest info, which is about 2021. You might also consider having a conversation with your students. So on the first day of class, I start something like this. I say, hey, I'm going to tell you how to use large language models wisely. I started by saying this year, how many of you use them? And they all sort of tentatively admit that in one class it was everybody. Actually, in the younger class, I think it was everybody. No, it's the reverse. In the class of seniors, everybody. In the class of sophomores, about half of them. So interesting. I tell them it's out there, it's real, it's okay. Don't feel bad for knowing that it exists. It might be part of your career, especially if you're graduating soon. Maybe less so if you graduate later and it's more integrated into the business world, I don't know. It can be helpful, but it is flawed. For one big reason being that citations are made up. The large language models are also short on topical knowledge. They're often just plain wrong about my field, psychology. And there's a time lag in adding new information. So I just tell them this on the first day and go, it's not going to give you very good information. If you use it, it's probably not going to get you a very good grade. Also, the point of the assignments I'm giving, so here I'm telling them about purpose, so they understand purpose, so they don't fall into that demotivated stage later on. The point is to train you to think and write like a psychological scientist. I don't want to train you to prompt an AI. In certain courses, I might want to train you to prompt an AI. In this one, I don't. I want to train you to do this writing and thinking. So what you turn in must be unmistakably yours. If you use these things, I think it can be okay. There are ways to use them wisely so that your work is still your own work. The key is that your work you turn in shouldn't be ChatGPT's work, it should be your work. I also make the note to them that I just made to you all, which is that language models are trained on the open internet. So that means no academic papers. It means also no books. It doesn't have access to the Library of Congress. There's no audio or video, so everything that's audio or video on the internet isn't part of it. So there's tons of stuff that's missing from what the large language models know. And so anything you have the AI do, you definitely get done, but you don't learn how to do it. And by the way, it can't do math. So in research methods and stats, I get to go, this won't do anything for you this whole semester. I'm going beyond my time a little bit. Forgive me, I promise that the last couple things I have here will be interesting and useful and applicable. Another thing that's important to talk about to me is that large language models use a ton of processing power. I forget the exact metaphor. It's something like if a Google search is a glass of water, a single prompt to ChatGPT is gallons and gallons, something like that. Like the amount more of energy and processing power they use per search is massive compared to what we have been doing for years and years. And so the requirement of added server farms and energy consumption across the US and the globe is massive for these things. And so that means we're using a ton more energy and we're pumping out a lot more exhaust. And so there's a link here to all kinds of articles about the environmental harms of using large language models on a regular basis. And so to kind of start to build myself an off-ramp here, I've already mentioned the perils of technological solutionism. Just thinking that there's an app that solves everything doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get us to where we want to go. And really, honestly, if you start using large language models in your daily work, like to send your emails or to create your documents for admin purposes, you might accidentally show how much of your work can be automated. So maybe don't do that. Maybe protect yourself a little bit. It also contributes to this academic culture that we have in a lot of places of competition and competitive accountability and one-upsmanship. And all of that stuff is inequity laden. It is easier for folks who are experienced to do well, easier for second generation folks to do well, or rather harder for first generation folks to do well is the direction I should say that. And just in general, like not to go too far out onto a limb, but the sort of the corporate structures that have gotten into academia in the last couple of decades, and all those things have really make precarity and dissatisfaction high across our entire world, really, our entire academic world. So thinking about how you use large language models in your own work, administratively or outside of teaching, is something I invite you to consider as well. So maybe you have some new ideas now today. We don't have time to share them. We don't have really enough folks around to share them. My advice is to get comfortable with the discomfort, because this stuff is going to keep happening. These apps are going to keep changing. You're going to want to be ready to adapt to them. But you already are. You've been doing it your whole teaching career. Nobody teaches in 2025 like they did in 1995, or even like they did in 2015, right? We are all constantly changing and adapting and growing. And though we all differ quite a lot, we are all professional learners and have the ability to continue to adapt and change to the times that we find ourselves in. Here's a couple other AI resources, just some links. So we'll share these slides out in some fashion or another tied to this meeting so that you can use these links as well. And I finish with an undoubtedly totally hilarious cartoon. For those not seeing it necessarily, it's a guy writing an email and he says, "Hey, AI turns this single bullet point into a long email I can pretend I wrote." And then we flip to the person receiving the email and she says, "AI makes a single bullet point out of the long email I can pretend I read." Don't fall into the trap, everybody. There's a way through this. It is complicated and it's going to be challenging, and your colleagues are an unending source of support and ideas. And I think we can get there together, and we can use it wisely if we're going to use it. So thanks for listening through this. We went a little bit over time. I'll take questions if anybody has them online or anyone in the room, and I appreciate the space to do. These thoughts have been sort of bouncing around in my head for a while, so being able to show them to folks is helping me as well. I hope it's helping you. Hi, Danielle.
Hey, the great presentation, very helpful. And I definitely agree with you that this is just another thing that we all have to learn how to adapt to. It isn't the end of the world, but as I emailed you earlier, I taught a class of 35 students in this semester. I had 5 students use sources that were not real. They almost all had the last name of Smith, Taylor, or Jones. So I would say a little tip for you is to look for those names in particular. Also, there's usually no DOI or a clear wrong DOI with like X's at the end of it. Like you just know, but a lot of times they're just not there at all. So those are the things that I've learned so far that I've been seeing. And I'm really struggling with what to do when this happens, just personally. And I understand that I do have an option to ignore it or embrace it. But I also feel like it's really just not okay to allow people, not necessarily allow, but just to really encourage people to understand what academic integrity is. So this semester I did have all of those folks go to, like, I submitted an academic integrity violation. It feels really, really harsh, and I don't want to do that in the semesters ahead. So I plan to do what you're suggesting, is teaching it first and then individually addressing. And then if it happens that second time, to maybe do the violation. This is a lot of information for me to get to my question, which is, do you know if anyone on the student services side is using any of this to help with the training that students get once an academic integrity violation occurs? Because I've never seen the materials that the students go through when an academic integrity violation happens. And is it being updated to what we're talking about today?
Okay, well, thanks for those ideas at the beginning, Danielle, and for sharing your personal experience. I think we all have to figure out how we're going to react. and all those reactions can be valid. All the structures are in place to work on these things. I think we talked in across a couple of faculty forums last year about whether to add language about AI to our syllabi and something official and university sort of what's the word I want? Not sponsored, but university endorsed, I guess. And I don't think you guys know, did we arrive at some, there's no like there's no syllabus statement, there's no official, there's nothing official in any of the university's documentation about large language model usage in turning things in. It definitely is true that when a student turns in something that the large language model wrote, they are turning in something they didn't write. So I think to that end, that fits an academic integrity violation, but I think they might not know that. I think they might not understand that that's what, I put in the prompt and I got this thing back. I had it made. I had it made for me. I didn't make it, but that bit of misunderstanding is generally why I try to take the approach you said you're going to, which is to talk with them first and then, move forward and maybe, to take stronger action from there if necessary. But even with a student recently who just kept using it, they were just getting bad grades on things because the stuff they were submitting wasn't good enough quality. And so we've had a couple meetings where I've had to say, hey, have you ramped up your usage of ChatGPT again? And they go, yeah. I go, okay, why? And then we talk about the why, and we try to get at those things rather than just being mad at them for using it, which I know you're not, Danielle. I'm just sort of speaking generally. But yeah, the general process is to talk about it at the beginning for sure. Tell them what it is. Tell them that you think it's good or bad. Tell them what you think. And then tell them how you recommend using it in your class, and then you can go from there. If you want to design things around it from there, you can. If you want to design opportunities to actually use it, you can. It can do pretty cool stuff. Like you can ask it to write a speech for you in the voice of a famous person from the past and on a particular topic, and it can kind of do it in a way that's interesting. So that can be a way for students to learn things about people from history, important people from history. So like if somebody has enough public writing in their past, that might be an interesting way to take advantage of the stuff that it has access to and can use. So I answered your preamble with a preamble of my own to finish by saying, I don't know either. I don't know what happens in accessibility services after an academic dishonesty violation, if there's a conversation about Gen AI or not, and that's something that we can check in with those folks about and maybe try to post alongside when we put this talk up somewhere. Maybe I'll throw it into the chat window of it later on so that we have that. Are any of those folks here by chance? Are they in the room digitally? Okay, so we'll finish up. If you have other questions or thoughts, shoot me an email. I'm happy to keep this conversation going, or you could put it in the Teams chat and I'll log in later and we can continue to chat there. Thanks everyone for being here, and hope you have a good rest of your Tuesday.